In corridor
Hey, are you
security,
all right?
the body outranked the screen.
I'm coming to
Always.
help. Don't move.
Mara Vale had learned that
Stay
rule
with
too
me. Help
late
is
once,
coming.
and she did not intend to learn it twice. So when Samir Kadeer's band flashed outbound while he was still breathing on white tile, she moved before Kamsan spoke, before Meridian argued, before the alarm finished, telling everyone what had already gone wrong.
I can't.
A
They
contractor's
need me.
hand had closed on Samir's
Watch
collar,
me.
neat and practiced, the way men touched cargo when they wanted the room to
Samir, you're
accept the
alive.
lie. Ajax hit the end of the leash. The
Hold
buckle
on. I'm here.
snapped hard under his weight. Boots slid on tile. The alarm kept cutting itself into 3 ugly notes, not done yet, still deciding how official the
Ajax
disaster
forward.
wanted to be. Dry antiseptic air
Hold
caught
the
in
line.
Mara's throat. Samir's eyes were open but unfixed. His breath scraped in, thin and stubborn. The custody band on his wrist flashed outbound again. Outbound. Crossed. Gone. He was none of those things. He was on the floor, alive enough to hurt. Mara did not look at the screen first. Screens were useful until somebody taught them to lie. She looked at hands, hips, knees, the angle of a shoulder before a grab. The contractor had shifted his weight before the alarm found its second cycle. That was what Ajax had caught. Not guilt, not truth, not some fairy tale scent of conspiracy. Movement. Intent moving through muscle. Samir's fingers twitched near the band, as if even half-conscious he knew that strip of plastic mattered. A stretcher waited too close to the door. Its wheels pointed outward, not inward. That bothered Mara more than the flashing status. People lied badly. Equipment told on them. The transfer man wore Meridian gray and a clearance badge clipped high on his vest. Badge plastic ticked once against his chest when he leaned. Real badge. Real chain. Real problem. A valid badge was more dangerous than a fake one. Fake meant fraud. Valid meant permission had already learned to look away. The room's junior medic froze with both hands in the air, useless and human, eyes bouncing from Mara to the band to the door. Nobody wanted to be the first witness to a mistake that had uniforms attached. Back him off, Mara said. No volume. No speech. Just command, flat enough to cut. The contractor pulled anyway, quick and clean, trying to use Samir's weight before anyone in the room chose sides. Mara stepped inside the motion and drove her forearm across the line of the grab. Her wrist jarred when she caught his arm. Pain flashed up to the elbow, bright and mean, the kind of small injury that made a person honest. Samir's heel dragged over the tile. Ajax surged, checked himself on the leash, low breath turning rough in his chest. Stretcher wheels chattered as another Meridian hand bumped the frame forward. Mara planted her boot against one wheel and stopped it dead. No technique worth naming. Just body angle, cost. The contractor's glove slipped off Samir's collar. Samir folded toward the floor instead of toward the door. Mara caught a fistful of his shirt and kept him in the room. The band pulsed outbound beside her hand, like a machine insisting on a ghost. A little blood had dried at Samir's lower lip. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just enough red to make the word outbound look obscene. For half a second the holding room went stupidly quiet, except for the alarm and Samir trying to breathe. White tile made everything obvious. The stopped stretcher. The contractor's open hand. Mara's grip on Samir's shirt. Ajax locked at her left side, all tendon and restraint. The band said outbound. Samir was still breathing. That was the whole crime. Ugly and simple, sitting where everyone could see it. A command voice barked from the hallway, too late to be useful. The Meridian man recovered his polite face fast, which Mara hated more than panic. Panic wasted time. Polite men with clearance spent it. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, "you are obstructing an authorized transfer." Mara kept Samir behind her knee and felt her wrist throb in time with the alarm. "He hasn't crossed anything," she said. She did not add that nobody was gone until a living body crossed the line. The room did not need doctrine. It needed people to stop pushing a breathing man toward a door. The door opened wider. 2 more Meridian personnel entered with a fresh clearance chain, and another stretcher, wheels already aimed at the corridor. The alarm finally died on its last note, which somehow made the room worse. Without the sound, everyone could hear Samir breathe. Everyone could hear the second stretcher roll closer. Mara tightened her grip and knew the first fight had only bought a few inches. The second stretcher did not pause at the door. That was the part Mara noticed before the ranking voice in the hallway found a name for the mess. The fresh clearance chain came in like it had rehearsed the floor, 2 Meridian personnel on either side, hands low, eyes polite. Wheels angled around the stopped frame. Samir breathed behind Mara's knee, each pull thin enough to make the dry antiseptic air sound heavy. His band still flashed outbound. Her wrist still burned from the first stop. Ajax stood tight at her left, leash drawn hard, not lunging now. Only loading his weight forward, in that quiet way, that meant the room was still moving, even when people pretended it was not. Badge plastic ticked against a vest. A command officer she knew by face, not trust, stepped into the holding bay entrance. "Lieutenant Commander Vale, Meridian clearance is valid. Release the patient to the transfer chain." Patient. Nice word. Soft word. People hid crimes inside soft words all the time, then printed them on clipboards later. The badge was real. That made it worse. The thought came with the stale taste at the back of Mara's mouth. Fake clearance would have simplified the room. Fake meant grab the wrist, strip the badge, hand the problem to somebody with forms and a dull little smile. A valid badge was more dangerous than a fake one. Valid clearance meant the corridor itself had leaned toward the lie. It meant the people behind Samir could claim timing, capacity, evacuation flow, all the clean phrases that turned bodies into slots. Nobody had to say erase. They could say release, transfer, harmonize, complete. Through the glass beyond the holding bay, a line of evacuees waited under hard lights, bags clutched to their chests. Faces turned toward a corridor clock that kept moving. That was the pressure Meridian wanted in the room. Dane Calder stood half a pace behind the new stretcher, gray suit under a transfer vest, calm as a man waiting for a slow elevator. "We're not here to argue," he said. His voice was clipped, polite, almost bored. He did not look at Samir as a person. He looked at the space between Samir and the door. That was enough. Mara shifted her boot, keeping the first stretcher pinned. The white tile showed every small adjustment, rubber soles edging inward, a wheel turning by 2 inches. Hands settling near Samir's shoulders instead of staying open. The first stretcher sat crooked under Mara's boot. The second one came around it like water, finding a crack. "Hold position," Mara said. The command officer's jaw tightened. "You are delaying a corridor window." There it was. The wider cost. The people not in the room. The evacuees waiting somewhere beyond the glass and heat, names stacked against departure times, lives depending on flow. Mara felt that pressure land where it was supposed to land. Meridian counted on it. Calder gave a small nod, not to her, to his team. Within seconds, the second stretcher moved. Not fast. Fast would have looked guilty. It came with professional patience, a clean slide of wheels on tile. One hand reaching for the sheet under Samir's shoulder, while another drifted near the band. Ajax's head snapped toward that hand. The leash went tight enough to bite into Mara's palm. No magic. No judgment. Just a hidden posture, a prepared escalation, muscle under fabric. Mara saw it after Ajax did. Door stays blocked, she said to the nearest corridor guard, and stepped across the stretcher's nose before anyone could pretend they had not heard. She forced the wheel to angle away from Samir. Her wrist complained hard enough to make her teeth meet. Pain kept things local. It kept her from floating up into the clean command language everyone else wanted to use. This was not policy yet. This was a hand too close to a wrist, a wheel too close to a door, a breathing man being measured against a false light. Calder's eyes flicked to the doorway, and Mara finally saw the shape of it. They did not only need permission. They needed movement. They needed Samir across a line, through a door, into a chain where the false status could stop being an error and start being custody. Once his living body matched the outbound band, everyone would prefer the lie to the embarrassment of unwinding it. He stays in this room, she said, until his body matches a status that can survive being looked at. Calder's mouth barely moved. You are making this larger than it needs to be. Samir coughed behind her, dry and small. His fingers curled over the band. The fresh stretcher rolled another inch. Mara could not arrest Meridian without breaking more than one rule, and Calder knew it. Then her radio double-clicked, short and sharp. Elias Rook's voice came through, scraped by Airside noise. Mara, I've got a seat in Kadeer's name on an aircraft that's already loading. Dead men don't usually need departure windows. The radio double-click had barely cleared the speaker before the holding bay changed shape around Mara. People heard aircraft and made it abstract. Schedules. Windows. Loading. Nice clean nouns from people who were not on white tile with a breathing man behind one knee. Mara heard Elias Rook through Airside static, and the room got smaller. Samir's band still flashed outbound on his wrist. The fresh stretcher still angled toward the door. Badge plastic ticked against a Meridian vest, tiny and smug. Calder looked at the doorway again, polite as dust. Mara kept her boot braced and her sore wrist close to her body. Pain sat there, hot and useful. It reminded her she could stop a hand, not a plane. Not alone. Say it clean, she said. Ajax pulled half an inch forward, then checked himself, leash tight across her palm. Samir made a sound behind her that was not quite a cough and not quite a word. The dry antiseptic air had turned sour with too many bodies, waiting for permission to become force. Rook came back through the comms, clipped and irritated, like irritation was cheaper than fear. Dead men don't need seats, Rook said over the comms. This one is wrecking my departure window. There it was. Not a screen problem anymore. A plane problem. A body in this room had a place in a loading chain, somewhere beyond the door, beyond the glass. Beyond the strip of hot air Mara could feel in her teeth whenever the airside seal opened. Elias did not waste words. He never had. Back when he spotted for people who thought distance made them wise, he talked in time, angle, weather, and bad odds. Now he talked in departure windows because that was the map he had. Mara did not like needing it. She needed it anyway. Can you stop it? She asked. No, Rook said. I can slow the load. I can make people ask why the empty seat is suddenly important. That buys you ugly minutes, not clean ones. Calder's eyes moved once, quick and flat. He had heard enough to understand the danger. He did not interrupt. The command officer shifted his weight near the entrance, trapped between a valid badge and a living contradiction. Mara hated the little theater of it. Everyone waiting for proof to grow legs and walk politely into a form. Samir was already right there, breathing through a cracked mouth, which should have counted. Somehow it never did until the right voice said it in the right channel. Samir moved. It was small, almost lost under the chatter of a stretcher wheel someone nudged too soon. His hand slid across his stomach, and folded over the wrist with the band. Not dramatic. Not a gesture for anyone watching. Protective. Instinctive. The way a man in deep water kept one hand on the last thing that floated. Mara saw the tendons in his fingers stand out. He knew enough to guard it. That mattered. Calder's nearest man leaned as if to help, which was how decent-looking violence often dressed for work. Ajax's head turned toward him, then toward the side door at the rear of the holding bay. Not the corridor door. The wrong door. His ears came up. His shoulder loaded against the leash. Mara felt the pull and did not follow yet. "Samir," she said low. "Stay with me." His eyes found her for half a second. Brown, bloodshot, furious in a tired way. His voice scraped out thin but precise. The first man crossed before the corridor had a name. Then his fingers tightened over the band as if the words had cost him more than breath. The phrase landed badly. First man. Before the corridor had a name. Not a mistake. Not backlog. A passage before authorization. A token fired before the story everyone was telling. A Meridian hand stilled on the stretcher rail, then started moving again too smoothly. The sentence had become a hazard in the room, and everyone with a badge knew it. Mara did not build the whole chain from it. She was not that lucky. But one more piece had weight now. Body. Band. Plane. First passage. All of it, still in motion. Rook's voice returned, lower. "I'm slowing one belt and irritating 3 people who outrank my paycheck. That's my charm limit." "Stay with the plane," Mara said. "I'm with the timing. You stay with the body." There was the old fight, dressed in new clothes. He wanted sequence. She wanted skin and breath. Both were right, which was the most annoying kind of problem, because it left no one to hate cleanly. Meridian used the pause. The second stretcher rolled an inch, then another rubber wheels, whispering over tile. Samir's band flashed again under his curled hand, light leaking between his fingers. Ajax pulled harder toward the rear side door. The leash burned across Mara's palm. His body said movement, possible threat, wrong air. He did not know proof. He did not know lies. He knew something had shifted where it should not have. Mara looked from the door to Calder's team, then back to Samir. Too many hands. Too much disinfectant. Too much polite pressure. The wrong door could be real, or it could be noise wearing a uniform. Ajax gave one low sound and leaned into the leash. The rear side door clicked once from the other side. The click from the rear side door did what clicks always did in tight rooms. It stole every eye that could afford to look. Ajax pulled toward it, hard enough that the leash cut a hot line across Mara's palm. His body was all forward pressure now, shoulders high, breath low. Sure in the way working zogs could be sure about the wrong piece of a larger mess. The rear door smelled wrong. Not one clean wrong. Too many wrongs layered together. Disinfectant sharp enough to sting. Fierce sweat under the dry antiseptic air. Crowded handlers, warmed plastic, old rubber, Samir's sour breath, Meridian soap. And the stale metal smell that came off stretcher frames after too many hands had touched them. Ajax sorted movement from scent, scent from stress, stress from Mara's grip. Or he tried. That was the problem. Trying looked a lot like knowing from the outside. Calder saw the pull. He saw everything that might become motion. His mouth did not change, but one Meridian hand relaxed from Samir's shoulder, while another shifted the second stretcher's nose toward the transfer corridor. White tile made the adjustment obvious, if a person was looking there. Mara was looking at the wrong door. "Veil," Rook said through the comms, airside noise scraping his voice. "I bought you about 3 minutes before somebody asks why their neat little load sheet has teeth marks." Mara did not answer. Ajax leaned again, and the rear door gave a second small sound. A hinge settling, maybe a body beyond it, maybe a pressure change. Mara's wrist throbbed. Samir's band flashed between his fingers. His eyes had gone half-lidded, but his hand stayed clamped over the band, stubborn as a nail in bad wood. She wanted to trust the dog. Trust had kept people alive. It had also buried them when the world got crowded and loud and full of competing signals. Ajax was not lying. Dogs did not lie. They just reported the world they had. And sometimes the world handed them garbage. Too many handlers were moving now. One Meridian woman stepped across Mara's peripheral vision with empty hands held high, a lovely little performance. Another handler shifted nearer Samir's feet. Stretcher wheels chattered, then softened as someone took weight off one side. Mara felt the cue picture smear. Door. Sweat. Hand. Breath. Badge. All of it, shouting at once. The dog was useful. The dog was not God. That distinction mattered. Mara moved one step toward Ajax's pull and lost the angle on Samir's feet. It was a small mistake, which was how the expensive ones usually arrived. Calder's team used it before she had fully made it. The second stretcher swung inward, not fast, not clumsy, just enough to put metal between Mara and Samir's hips. A Meridian hand slipped under the sheet. Samir reacted late but not helplessly. His heel dragged. One stretcher wheel scraped sideways with an ugly, stubborn bark against the tile. He had shifted his weight on purpose, weak as he was, forcing the frame crooked because it was the only lever he had left. Good man, Mara thought, and had no time to make the thought kinder. Ajax barked once toward the rear door, sharp and frustrated. Mara saw that the side-source sound had pulled her off the real line. The actual movement was not behind the door. It was under her nose, wrapped in clean gloves and polite timing. She cut back toward Samir. A shoulder hit her ribs from the side. Not hard enough to look like an assault, hard enough to steal breath. The holding bay tilted white and bright for one ugly second. Her wrist caught the stretcher rail and pain bit up her arm. No clean correction. No pretty recovery. She got a boot against the crooked wheel anyway and shoved it harder out of line. The delay had already done its damage. Samir had gained distance toward the transfer corridor, not by much, but inches were a language. Meridian spoke fluently. Ajax checked himself when Mara snapped the leash back, confused heat running through his body. He had not failed her on purpose. That was almost worse. Purpose could be fought. Noise had to be managed while it was still eating time. Wrong picture, Mara said under her breath, more to herself than to him. Ajax's ears flicked, and he settled half a step, still burning toward the rear door. Still astounding why the world had punished him for reporting it. Calder's nearest man kept the stretcher moving with the patience of a bad promise. Samir's fingers stayed over the band, but his arm was shaking now. The wheel he had dragged crooked wobbled and chattered, slowing the frame in little bursts. Not enough. Mara stepped in again, ribs tight, breath shallow, and caught a glimpse ahead. The transfer corridor opening into glass, too bright, too clean. Reflecting bodies before they arrived. The official, safe route. Institutions loved naming traps after virtues. Hot air pushed faintly from beyond the next seal. The stretcher nose crossed the threshold into the glass corridor. Samir was still alive. The band was still attached. And Mara was one step behind, because she had almost trusted the wrong signal. The glass corridor took Samir in like it had been built to display him. White light ran along the walls and floor, bounced off the panels, and gave every movement 3 witnesses. The stretcher nose crossed first, then Samir's feet, then the band flashing from under his shaking hand. Outbound. Still attached. still lying. Mara came in one step behind with her ribs tight from the hit in the holding bay, and her wrist sending a mean little pulse up her arm. The corridor gave her no corner, no shadow, no friendly, ugly place to work from. Just glass, polish, and a clean official route pretending it had never hurt anybody. Hard footsteps carried too well. Meridian shoes clicked ahead and behind. Calder stayed off Samir's shoulder. Not close enough to look like force, close enough to keep the movement honest in all the wrong ways. Ajax stayed back at the entrance, checked by crowding and the bad cue that had just cost them distance. The safe route had become a box that moved with them. And Samir was the thing inside it that everyone could see, but nobody was allowed to name correctly. Mara read the corridor the way she read bodies. Glass lied differently from screens. It did not erase motion. It multiplied it until the truth looked busy and cheap. The reflection of the stretcher moved half a breath before the reel reached her left side. A Meridian shoulder appeared twice, one body and one ghost, and both aimed Samir toward the next line. Her first clean option came and died in the same second. A straight path. A clear break in the bodies. A way to stop movement if she treated the corridor like a range and forgot the man strapped to the proof. The problem was overlap. Samir, wrist, band, rail, and line sat inside the same narrow slice of glass and light. Stop the wrong thing, and she might destroy the living contradiction she was trying to preserve. Her radio cracked. Elias had too much Airside noise under him now. If he crosses that marked line, they'll claim the status cured itself, he said. Not fixed, hardened. Mara kept moving. How long? Less than you want. The glass carried Calder's face beside her own, calm and pale in the reflection. He was watching the line before he watched her. That told her where the real weapon was. The stretcher jerked when Samir shifted his weight. Weak, badly timed, but alive. One wheel skipped and chattered against the polished floor, the sound sharp as teeth. Meridian corrected around it with practiced patience. A hand slid near Samir's wrist. Mara closed distance and caught that arm against the glass wall with her forearm, hard enough to stop the reach. Not clean enough to make it painless. Her shoulder hit the panel. Air punched out of her chest. The corridor answered with a flat, bright thump that ran through the glass and clanked back through her ribs. For 1 second, the reflections broke into pieces. Samir's face. The band. Calder's badge. Mara's own mouth open without enough breath in it. The dirty option was still there, shining in the geometry, and she refused it again. Refusal was not passive. It had weight. It cost position. She drove herself back into the moving angle and forced the stretcher nose away from the straight line. Meridian gave ground by inches, which meant they were winding by inches too. Hard footsteps came faster from the far end. Not a run. Professional people rarely ran when they could make urgency look authorized. The corridor made them all look doubled. Twice the threat, twice the confusion, none of the cover. Samir's band flashed under his hand, light bleeding through his fingers. The marked line ahead was not dramatic. That was what made it ugly. A thin change in the floor, a reader on the side, a seam in glass where one custody zone pretended to become another. Tiny thresholds did so much damage. Mara kept Samir's body on her side of it by less than an arm's length. Elias was breathing harder on the comms now. Mara, you've got bodies coming from the terminal end. I see glass. Then trust the ugly one. She looked past the clean reflections. One panel caught a shape that had not entered the corridor yet. A shoulder, then an elbow. Then the dark cut of a hand, moving before the person appeared. The reflection moved before the body. The safe route had another mouth. Calder's team kept the stretcher rolling toward the line, while the new figure approached from the far end, still hidden from direct view and already visible in the glass. Mara's breath came back wrong. Hot, shallow, annoying. Samir was alive. The band was attached. The line was close. And the corridor had just shown her the next threat before the room itself had the decency to admit it. The body in the glass arrived before the person did. Mara saw the hand first, flattened by reflection, then the shoulder, then a Meridian vest sliding out from the far terminal opening. The corridor threw him into three places at once. Direct, reflected, half lost in glare. Samir's stretcher rolled toward the seam in the floor while the new man closed from the bright terminal end. White light spilled behind him, not soft, not useful, just hard enough to bleach every edge and make depth feel like a rumor. Mara's ribs still refused a full breath. Her wrist throbbed where glass and metal had argued with it. The band stayed visible under Samir's trembling hand, still flashing the false word that wanted to become truth. Outbound. Crossed. Gone. Ahead, the glass corridor did not end in another room. It widened into open terminal floor, bright and almost empty of cover. There were benches bolted too far away to matter, stanchions thin as jokes, and a polished floor that showed feet before faces. The official route did not end. It widened. That was worse. Ajax strained behind her at the corridor entrance, but the echo turned him into noise inside noise. His breath bounced off glass. Meridian shoes bounced off glass. Samir's stretcher wheels clicked, doubled, tripled. A handler from Mara's side pulled Ajax back before the corridor swallowed his cue picture again. Not punishment. Not doubt. Management. The dog had already given her one wrong picture in a room with too many smells. This space had too many sounds, too many reflections, too many moving copies of the same bad idea. Mara felt the loss at once, like somebody had taken a hand off her shoulder in the dark, except everything here was painfully bright. "Back him out," she said. "Hold Ajax outside the echo, eyes on the wrist." Ajax resisted for half a beat, then gave ground under control, confused and angry and still useful in the only way left. Not making the mess worse. Calder used the moment, because he always used moments. His team angled Samir toward the bright terminal opening. One man took the rear of the stretcher. Another guided the front, keeping the banded wrist turned inward, but visible enough to torment the room. Elias cut in over the comms. "You're at the terminal mouth. Airside door is straight ahead, 40 yards beyond the open floor." I can see it. She could. That was the problem. The terminal space hit her with hard light and echo. No crowd crush. No convenient chaos. Just open floor, bright columns, glass walls, and a long, clean lane toward the airside door. A person could be seen from everywhere and helped from nowhere. Sound separated from source. A footstep could sound behind her and arrive from the side. Meridian moved Samir into that exposure with the calm patience of people escorting a mistake to its preferred conclusion. Mara tracked 4 things because she had no room for 5: body band, line, door. Calder drifted left, drawing her eye. The stretcher went right by 3 feet. 3 feet was enough. She cut across the open floor and felt every step in her ribs. Hard light flattened distance. Echo ruined timing. The dog was no longer at her side. That absence kept trying to become panic, so she made it data instead. No dog. No cover. No clean angle. Samir's lips moved without sound. His fingers stayed hooked over the band. The airside door ahead gave a small mechanical sigh. A seal beginning to release. Hot dust pushed through before the gap was visible, dry and bitter, carrying runway heat into the polished terminal like the outside world had lost patience. Samir's stretcher was almost there. Mara hit the front rail with her good hand and shoved it off line. Not far. Far enough to steal a breath from the transfer team and turn their clean lane crooked. A Meridian shoulder slammed into her side. She stayed upright mostly because falling would have been too generous. The airside door seal hissed open behind Samir. The sound was low, final, and stupidly polite. Hot dust rolled over the floor and caught in Mara's throat. Beyond the doorway, the airside lane burned white under floodlight and heat. Inside, the terminal gave her nothing but echo. Calder said something she did not bother to keep. The words were just wrapping around movement. Mara saw the threshold now. Not a metaphor, not policy, not a neat little term for people who liked meetings. It was a door, with hot air coming through it, and a living man inches away from being moved where the lie wanted him. She could hold the line or stay with the body. Not both. Samir's band flashed again. His stretcher wheel bumped the airside threshold. Mara tightened her grip on the rail as the door opened all the way. Hot dust came through the airside door before the stretcher fully crossed it. The runway side hit the terminal like an animal breath, dry and hot and carrying fuel, grit, and engine vibration in one ugly swallow. Mara kept one hand on the rail while the front wheel bumped over the threshold. Samir's band flashed under his fingers. Outbound. Still lying. The airside lane opened ahead under floodlights that made the dust look white. There was nowhere to stand that did not expose something. Her body, Sam's body, the band, the line behind them. Calder's transfer team knew it. They pushed with measured calm, because panic was for amateurs and people with less paperwork. "Rook, hold timing," Mara said into the comms. "Line team, mark the threshold. I'm on the body." Then, beyond the lane, Elias stepped into view. Not a voice. Not a dry little warning over the comms. A body in the heat. Standing where a controller had no reason to stand unless he wanted every camera and every irritated supervisor to remember his face. He planted himself beside a moving belt cart and raised one hand toward the ground crew. The nearest loader slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. It was a small thing, almost pathetic. So naturally it mattered. Air shimmered around him. His shirt pulled dark at the spine. The lane gave him no mercy and no shade. Elias did not wave like a hero. He looked annoyed, which was more honest. Mara saw him through dust and floodlight, one shoulder turned toward the aircraft chain. His other hand braced on the side of the belt cart, as if the machine had personally offended him. Men in reflective vests started shouting. Their words died under engine rumble before they reached the door. The comms double-clicked. "Don't thank me," Rook said, breath rougher than usual. "I'm becoming a personnel problem." Mara almost laughed, which would have been stupid and badly timed, so she kept her mouth shut. He could do what she could not. He could put his body inside the timing without making a formal accusation. He could make loading become awkward, slow, visible. He could not stop it cleanly. The stretcher moved another foot. Mara saw the problem divide itself. The line behind her, the body ahead of her, Elias exposed in the lane. Ajax no longer at her side. Too many centers. Not enough hands. And behind all of it, the plane kept accepting motion like hunger. Meridian split on Calder's small nod. Two stayed with Samir. One peeled right toward Mara's shoulder, forcing her to turn. Another stepped back toward the terminal opening, where Ajax had been held out of the space. Ajax surged against restraint. A dark weight and teeth and frustration, but a handler had him tight and back from the threshold. Separated. Restrained. Useful in theory, useless in the exact second that mattered. That was how bad seconds worked. Samir's stretcher angled into the airside lane, front end toward a waiting vehicle with its rear door open. The vehicle was not dramatic. No roaring monster, no cinematic nonsense. Just white paint, running lights, and enough space to make a man disappear under a valid transfer. Mara shoved the rail hard left. A Meridian shoulder hit her from the side and stole half her balance. She caught herself with her bad wrist and felt pain flare bright enough to clean the air from her head. Calder's team used the flare. The stretcher rolled past her hip. Samir twisted his banded wrist outward as the rail rattled, a tiny exhausted turn that kept the false flash visible to anyone looking. His other arm slipped off the sheet and knocked against the rail, bone on metal, small and awful. Mara had the line for 1 second. Then she had Samir. She could not have both. The airside threshold behind her was still hot with dust, the terminal bright behind glass, the lane ahead flattened by floodlights. Elias stepped farther into view and took the hit that came with being visible. 2 loaders yelling at him. 1 supervisor pointing. A radio lifted toward a complaint that would probably have teeth later. Career risks first. Body risk next. He held the delay anyway, jaw tight, one hand still on the belt cart. "Move, Mara," he said over the comms, and this time the radio did not make him distant. It made him sound like a man spending something he did not have. Calder's team pushed Samir toward the vehicle zone. 1 wheel dropped from smooth terminal flooring onto rougher airside concrete and rattled hard enough to shake Samir's arm. The band kept flashing through his fingers. Ajax barked once from behind, cut off by restraint and echo. Mara left the line. She chased the body. The vehicle's open rear door waited in the heat like an answer nobody decent would ask for. Behind her, the threshold remained open, bright and hungry. Ahead, Samir was moving faster than truth. The runway edge ate the last clean sounds. Jet noise rolled over the lane and shredded voices before they could become orders. Floodlights flattened the concrete into a pale, exposed strip, every person reduced to shadow, dust, and motion. Mara came after the stretcher with her ribs locked tight and her bad wrist held close until she needed it, which was always too soon. Samir was at the vehicle now, half swallowed by the open rear door, his band still flashing under his hand like a tiny, stubborn accusation. Calder's people did not run. They flowed. 1 at the stretcher head, 1 at the side, 1 between Mara and the open door. Calder looked at the vehicle's rear door before he looked at Samir's face, and that told Mara exactly what he considered the prize. The vehicle idled low, harmless-looking in that way machines had right before they became decisions. Heat came off the concrete and dried Mara's mouth until her tongue felt scraped. Elias was somewhere behind and left, still exposed, still buying irritation with his own name. His voice came torn over comms, broken by engine wash. Loading slowed, not dead. You've got maybe seconds. Seconds. Everyone loved giving her seconds, as if seconds were a thoughtful gift and not a cruel little insult wrapped in static. The band flashed again, patient as a bad machine. Samir's fingers twitched over it, still guarding the only thing in the lane that could call him alive. Mara saw the clean option because she was trained to see clean options. A straight line through one body. A clean interruption of movement. A way to stop the vehicle before it took Samir, fully under Meridian control. Then Samir shifted, weak and unlucky, and the option turned rotten. His shoulder crossed the same space. His banded wrist was too close. The witness and the proof were inside the shape of the solution, which made it no solution at all. The world had found a way to make competence dangerous. She did not take it. She swallowed the choice and moved instead. Dust stuck to the sweat at the side of her face. The vehicle door rocked as Meridian pulled Samir inward. His heel hit the edge once, dragged, vanished halfway. With the little strength he had left, Samir angled his wrist outward instead of hiding it against his chest. letting the false flash show through the gap between fingers. Mara tracked body band vehicle hands. No math. No miracle. Just the awful geometry of a living man, too close to everything that could erase him. Ajax came in from the right, released into a narrow piece of usefulness, not free, not victorious. He hit the space between one Meridian guard and Mara, forcing the man back 2 steps. Seconds bought. No more. A dog could open a door in time. He could not rewrite what was behind it. The leash trailed tight behind him, controlled by a handler who knew better than to pretend this was a rescue. Mara spent the seconds badly and well. There was no elegant version. She drove into the gap Ajax made and caught the vehicle doorframe with one hand, the stretcher rail with the other. Pain opened in her wrist like a second mouth. The rail jerked. Samir gasped, a dry, broken sound almost erased by jet noise. The transfer man nearest the door tried to keep moving him inward, not with rage, not with a villain's snarl, just with dead-eyed patience. That was Meridian's real weapon. Patience with human damage. Mara slammed her shoulder into the rail and changed the angle by inches. Inches again. The currency of this stupid little war. Ajax lost his hold on the space when the guard recovered and drove him sideways with body pressure, not enough to hurt him. Enough to end the gift. Elias shouted something over the comms, but the engine wash tore it open. Mara did not need the words. She saw him now beyond the vehicle lane, one arm out. Blocking another ground crew, motion with his own body, and looking very much like a man who had used up his welcome. Samir's hand stayed clamped over the band. The false light pulsed between his fingers. Proof, if proof could survive being dragged. The vehicle rocked again under her grip, impatient, hungry, stupidly official. The vehicle moved. Not far. Far enough to make the ground change under Mara's boots and turn her grip into a bad promise. The rear door stayed open with Samir inside it, and not inside it, his legs caught at the edge. His body pulled toward the dark square of the interior. Half in was enough for Meridian. Half in would become in. In would become gone. Mara ran with the first lurch, because letting go would have been a cleaner mistake, and she had used up clean. Dust kicked under the tires and hit her shins. The floodlights made every bad angle public. Calder was near the front quarter, face pale under the hard light, watching movement instead of blood. Mara could not stop the vehicle cleanly. Could not take the easy line. Could not ask Ajax for a miracle or Elias for another body to spend. She had Samir's rail, the open door, and the knowledge that the next choice would be worse. The vehicle rolled another few feet with Samir half inside, his band still flashing outbound into the dust. Mara stayed with it, boots skidding, breath gone, one hand on proof and the other on a machine already trying to leave. The vehicle kept moving, and Mara went with it because the other choice was letting Samir become paperwork with a pulse. Dust kicked under the tires and slapped her shins. Jet noise tore every shout into useless pieces. The open rear door bounced beside her shoulder, a dark square dragging a living man toward the inside. Samir was half in, half out, one leg twisted at the threshold, one hand still clamped over the custody band. The flash leaked between his fingers. Outbound. Still false. Still attached. Proof, if the lane did not grind it into something nobody could read. Mara's bad wrist had stopped being a body part and become an argument. Every jerk of the rail sent pain up her arm and into her teeth. Calder's people held their lines with that same patient damage, one hand on Samir, one on the door, one body moving to peel Mara loose. The runway hardline stretched white under floodlights. No cover. No clean space. No good shot. Just heat, grit, breath, and a vehicle trying to turn a man into a status no one would bother questioning once it left the lane. Mara saw the bad shot again. Not as a weapon lesson, not as a fantasy. As a temptation wearing a clean shirt. One hard interruption could stop the vehicle. One decisive act could end the movement. And Samir was still too close. His wrist, the band, his ribs, the proof, all inside the same ugly geometry. Take the clean line and she might save the corridor by destroying the only living contradiction in it. That was not discipline. That was ego with better posture. Ajax hit the edge of the fight from behind her, low and fast, forcing one Meridian guard off Mara's shoulder. Not a victory. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Enough to make the guard curse and shift his weight. Enough to make the door gap breathe wider. Elias was visible beyond the lane now, fully exposed under floodlights, one arm braced against a service barrier, while 2 ground crewmen shouted around him. He had put his body where delay became a problem no one could quietly delete. His voice came over comms in torn pieces. Still, holding, move. He sounded close to done. Everybody did. The proof bundle was not an idea anymore. It was Samir's breath, the flashing band, Elias in the lane, the failed transfer not yet failed. Mara used the seconds Ajax bought. She dropped her weight backward against the rail and pulled the stretcher angle away from the vehicle interior. The motion was ugly, all shoulder and locked knees and bad wrist, no clean name for it, and no instruction worth stealing from it. Metal scraped. Samir cried out, thin and broken, but his hand stayed over the band. A Meridian man came in from her blind side. Ajax met him long enough to break his step, body pressure against body pressure, then lost the space as the man recovered. That was the whole gift. Seconds. Mara spent them. She drove her hip into the open door, took the impact across her ribs, and felt something deep inside complain, in a language she did not have time to translate. The vehicle lurched. The rear end slewed just enough that the driver had to correct. Not a spectacular stop. Nothing exploded. No one flew through the air like the universe had hired a stunt team. The machine bucked, scraped, and died into a hard crooked halt with Samir still half out. The stretcher wedged wrong, the transfer line broken. Result. Consequence. Cost. Good enough. For 2 beats nobody owned the silence, because there was no silence. Only jet noise and ragged breathing and the tick of hot metal under the vehicle. Mara was on one knee, one hand still locked on the rail, her wrist bright with pain and useless fury. Samir lay partly outside the vehicle, alive. His band was attached. It still flashed outbound under his fingers, stubborn and obscene. Elias stood in the hot lane beyond them, bent forward now, one hand on his thigh, exposed to every supervisor, camera, complaint, and consequence he had just invited. Ajax stood between Mara and one recovering Meridian guard, panting hard, held on a tight line, no victory in him, just work. Calder had stopped moving. That was the first honest thing he had done all day. The transfer had failed in public enough to matter and physically enough to become evidence. Not as a report. As a breathing man beside a broken vehicle line. With a false status still visible and too many witnesses looking at the wrong thing at last. The bundle had survived, battered and breathing. White light shifted near the corridor threshold as Colonel Amara Keene stepped into view. She did not hurry. She did not save them. She arrived after the proof had made itself impossible to ignore. Colonel Amara Keene came into the white corridor light with no cavalry behind her and no speech ready in her mouth. That alone made Mara trust her half an inch, which was about as much trust as the day had left in storage. Speeches were where useful action went to die wearing polished shoes. Keene's boots stopped at the recognized custody threshold. Behind her, the corridor line glowed in hard white, the kind of light that made fatigue look like evidence. Mara stayed on one knee beside Samir, one hand still on the rail, wrist pulsing, ribs tight, throat full of dust. Samir breathed in shallow cuts. His custody band still flashed outbound under his fingers. Alive. Attached. False before recognition. Elias stood out in the hot lane, guarded now by nothing except the fact that everyone had seen him spend himself in public. Ajax was down on his haunches, panting, controlled, eyes still tracking movement because the dog had better habits than most organizations. Calder took one step toward Keen with his badge lifted. Not aggressive, polite, predictable. Keen did not look at his face first. She looked at Samir's wrist, the vehicle, the broken transfer line, Elias, then Mara. Finally, somebody read the room in the right order. Recognize him, Keen said. 2 words. No sermon. A corridor officer beside her hesitated just long enough to prove he was human, then keyed the custody reader at the line. The device chirped once, flat and unhappy. Calder's badge went red at the same time. Not metaphorically. The small light on his access clip changed, and the reader beside the threshold denied him with a hard little tone. Meridian's nearest transfer badge followed. Red. Then another. Badge, plastic clicked against frozen vests while the room tried to decide whether denial counted as weather. A visible freeze, clean enough for everyone to understand, and small enough for nobody to pretend it was justice. Calder's mouth tightened. His badge hand stayed raised half a second too long, still presenting authority after authority had already failed him. Then he lowered it slowly, as if gravity had become political. Meridian corridor clearance is suspended from this custody chain, Keen said. Not loud, not proud. Just an order with teeth. Samir's hand twitched on the band. Mara felt the corridor shift, not because it had become good, which would have been adorable, but because for once it had been forced to point at the breathing man instead of the cleaner record. The band changed after the recognition took. It did not sing. It did not bloom with some generous little miracle. The outbound flash simply stopped. 1 second it was there, pulsing between Samir's fingers like a lie with a heartbeat. The next, it went still. Samir stared at it as if quiet could hurt too. His fingers did not open right away. They loosened one at a time, slow and suspicious, as if silence might be another trick the room had learned. Mara noticed her own hand still angled toward the band, still wanting to shield it even after recognition had done what recognition was supposed to do. The body knew before the system did, and the body did not forgive as quickly. Keen turned to the corridor team. Limited movement, corrected custody only, no Meridian handlers on the line. The first evacuees came through after that. Slow at first, a woman with a taped bag clutched to her chest. An old man with one shoe unlaced, 2 brothers carrying the same suitcase between them. Their footsteps crossed the white threshold under corrected custody, soft and ordinary, and therefore almost unbearable. No one clapped. Bless them for that tiny mercy. Elias was guided in from the lane with one sleeve torn and his face gray under the heat. He gave Mara half a nod, the kind that cost less than sentiment, and said more. Ajax leaned against her leg, tired but controlled, leash slack for once. Keen looked down at Mara then, not warmly. Warmth would have been suspicious this late in the day. Fail. Temporary corridor custody control remains with you under observation until relieved. Constrained authority. Not trust. Not vindication. A leash, with better wording. Mara could live with that. She pushed herself upright and nearly failed, which seemed fair. Samir was being moved again, but slowly now into recognized custody. With the band quiet on his wrist and 2 non-Meridian hands on the rail. Calder stood outside the line with a dead badge, and a face that had already begun preparing for whatever version of events would survive upward. The first ISM passage was still out there. The first corridor token had fired before the corridor had a name. And no one in the white light had touched the person who ordered it. Not yet. The higher pressure remained off-page, which was where powerful things preferred to stand. Mara watched one more evacuee cross under corrected custody. She did not feel victory. She felt temporary permission to keep moving, which was colder and more useful. One door opened. Not the whole system. Not justice wrapped in clean paper. One door, one living man still breathing, one band no longer lying for the room. For now, that had to be enough.